Okay, ladies and gentlemen, shall I start? I sort of feel like you've come on time and I'm here, so we'll start. I love the fact that I can see you, but I'm standing in the dark. That's great. So, my name is Jo Jewell. I run mindful parenting workshops and a variety of other workshops that I'll talk about through a company called Mindful Me. So we do quite a lot of variety of work, but everything we do comes from a perspective of mindfulness. So whilst I'm not going to talk specifically about mindfulness tonight, I will be coming from that perspective. So, welcome. Thank you for coming and giving up your evening. I know it's not easy to come out this time of night. I'll be honest, I found it quite difficult as well, especially as my dinner was cooking as I left the house. But I'm glad that we're here. I do try to make this interactive, so whilst I'll hang around at the end and I'll try to take questions, if you've really got a burning question that you want to ask, then just ask. And please, if I ask a question, don't leave me hanging. It's quite lonely standing here. So do me a favour and you know, interact with me. I'd really appreciate that. So I'm going to introduce myself through using a couple of photos. I think it's quite boring to have a CV up on the board, so I'm not going to do that. So I originally qualified as a child and adolescent counsellor in the UK. I actually cannot even remember when that was, I'll be honest. I think it was about 20 years ago. Now, you know when you get to a certain age, you stop counting. I've definitely stopped counting. I came to Dubai in 2007. I worked in schools in the UK before I came. I cannot believe I ended up working in a school. I never thought that would happen, but it was a lovely environment to work with children and families. And when I came to Dubai, I also worked in a school. Some of you may know it was this school. So I was here for 8 years as the first school counsellor, and we've had some other lovely school counsellors since then. So I was here for 8 years, and my children came here. They've all left now. That's a relief. No more children at school. And during that time, I worked a lot with parents. But to be honest with you, the main reason that I'm standing here today is nothing to do with any of that. It's to do with these lovely people. I'm a parent before everything else, and I do this, I teach parents, I talk about mindful parenting, not because I was a good parent, not because I received the parenting that I'm going to talk to you about tonight. I definitely did not receive that type of parenting. So, I don't know about you, but do you have memories of your childhood? Do you ever remember when your parents did things that you thought, I'm never going to do that when I'm a mum or a dad. I'm going to let my kids do whatever they like, and I'm not going to stop them. I vividly remember my parents saying and doing things and me thinking, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to speak to my children like that. And then as I got older, I remember thinking, I'm never going to have children, actually, because this just feels like really hard work. So, as I entered my parenting journey, I was totally ill-equipped to do this incredibly important job. I remember leaving the hospital with a baby thinking, why have I been given this child? Do they not know? I don't have a clue what to do. Where's my training manual? Did you get a training manual? Well, I definitely didn't get one. And so I entered parenting with an absolutely really clear idea of the parent that I was not going to be. The problem was I had no clue of the parent I was going to be. So there was this void, there was like this gap. And I thought, well, everyone tells you it comes naturally. Did people tell you that? Joe, it'll be fine, it'll come naturally. And I was like, if they knew what naturally meant to me, they wouldn't say that. So I thought maybe we'll muddle through, and we sort of did for the first couple of years. And then it just all came crashing down, because I had this delightful toddler this 2-year-old child who was absolutely not going to be parented in the only way I knew how. I tried the time out, the naughty step, the putting them in their room, the taking stuff away, all of that. And he would not have any of that. So we just used to get into fights. And I vividly remember sitting on my stairs one day when he was about 2 years old, just thinking, I'm going to have him adopted because I don't think I can do this. I really don't think I can do this. And he deserves, surely, a better mother than me. And then once I'd calmed down and I realised that wasn't really an option, even though my best friend is an adoption counsellor, I thought, okay, Joe, put your big girl knickers on and do something, because this isn't working. And that was when I started figuring out I better learn how to do this parenting thing. So that was really the beginning of my journey. So the reason that I'm here and that we're all here tonight is really because of them. They remind me of this regularly. They tell me they should get a cut of my earnings because really they're why this started. And so I started practicing the strategies I'm going to talk to you about tonight when my eldest son was about 2. He often tells me that I was his guinea pig and that the others got a much better deal, because apparently I was a much better mother by the time they came along. I still made mistakes, I still do, of course, because we all do. And of course, along this journey with me learning and failing and learning and sometimes getting it right and then making another mistake, something happened to these children. They grew up, because that's what they do. So every time I thought I got it right, okay, I've got this sorted, I know how to parent a toddler. Of course, he became a child, and then an older child, and then a preteen, and then an adolescent. So you're sort of running to keep up and figuring out what is going to come next. And they just keep throwing stuff at you, don't they? Do you ever have a day when nothing happens in your family? Or it's just peaceful? No? So they grew up. In fact, that picture's a couple of years old now. It's very hard to get them, even in the same continent, to have a photograph taken, let alone on Black Palace Beach at 6 o'clock in the morning, which is when this was taken. And they've taught me a huge amount along this journey. Have you realised by now that actually in your relationship with your children, that they are the teachers? You're just here to learn. They're actually the ones that are going to teach you. The problem is we think we're in charge. So we don't listen very well. And that is a problem in our parenting. So, as I said, this journey was fun and painful and amazing and awful and fabulous and frightening. I don't think I've ever had so many variety of emotions in my life until I became a mother. And really all I ever wanted... Oh, I've just jumped a slide, hold on. I love it. Don't you love it when that happens? When the slide's not in the order that you wanted it to be? Before I talk about what I wanted, what I'm going to share with you is a bit about what mindful parenting is. Because really that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Anybody know what mindful parenting is? Anyone have any clue? So you all came to this talk and you had no idea what I was going to talk about. Is that what you're telling me? Is that what you did? Luckily, I'm going to talk. She made you. Yeah, I get that. Okay, I made him as well. So we're all in the same boat. Okay. Okay. So let me tell you. Let me share with you what it is. And this is not my definition. This is the definition of John Kabat-Zinn, who is a mindfulness teacher, very famous mindfulness teacher. He describes mindful parenting as being a lifelong practice. It goes on and on and on, because you're going to be a parent forever. In your child's eyes, you will always be their mother or father. And what I really love about this is he talks about it as a practice, which means I never have to be the expert. I never have to get to a point where I absolutely know exactly what to do and I get it right all the time. Because honestly, that creates serious performance anxiety in me. If somebody tells me, right, well, by now you should know exactly what to do. And it's because it's a practice, it means that if we practice it, we get better at it. Does that make sense to you? So it's a lifelong practice. It means that we become less attached to outcomes and more mindful of what is unfolding in our lives and our children's lives. We are so attached to outcomes in our children's lives. One of the most common outcomes that I hear parents say, I just want my child to be happy. But what if they aren't? What if they're not happy? What if something happens in their life and they're unhappy? How are you going to cope with that? If one of your outcomes for your child is, I want them to be happy, any time that you see that they're unhappy, how does that make you feel? Panicky, worried, anxious, stressed? Yeah? So these outcomes that we have for our children, I mean, the other one is, I want them to be successful. So what happens when they fail a maths test? All of a sudden, your child in your head is in prison, a drug addict, and is never going to survive. Isn't that true? We suddenly do this time travelling 20 years forward just because they failed one maths test. So having less of an attachment to these outcomes allows us to be much more present with what is actually happening here, with this 5-year-old in front of me, or this 10-year-old, or even this 17-year-old. It's about moment to moment, open-hearted and non-judgmental attention. Wow, I wish somebody would give me that. Would give me that. What a gift to give someone. Non-judgmental attention, to give somebody an open heart. It's quite incredible, really, isn't it? So you can see why it's a lifelong practice. You can see why it takes time to learn these things. It's not simple and it's not easy. But the science is there. The research is there that tells us parenting children in this way has a significantly better outcome for that child than any other way of parenting. So the thing is, it's hard to argue with science, isn't it? I've tried, believe me. But if that's the facts, then what I have to do next, if I believe the facts, if I trust the science, then I've got to figure out how to do this thing. And that's really where I come in. This is the right slide this time. Because the thing is, parenting isn't like this, is it? And you all dying, you wish now you're on a beach in Bali somewhere, don't you? I could transport you there, but I think we better stay here a bit longer. Parenting's not like this. We have these odd occasions. I've sat on that sun lounger on a beach and watched my children play, all three of them happily, with sand castles and buckets, and sat there and gone, oh, see, I'm such a good mother. Look at them, they're sharing, they're playing really nicely with each other. I've nailed it. 2 seconds later, one of them has emptied sand over the other one's head, they've pushed over the sand castle, they've decided they're hungry. And the thing is, if you just live for those moments of perfection, you're just constantly seeking something which is hardly ever attainable, and you miss being present. You miss the joy that is actually here. So I don't blame you for wishing that parenting was more like this, but it's not real, because we're all imperfect, and so are our children. So this is an amazing quote from an amazing book. It's one of the earliest books I read about parenting, and it came out around a time when we were really being bombarded with a lot of what I'd call behaviour management strategies. I don't think anyone in this room is as old as me, but if you are, you would remember like Super Nanny being on TV, and all these books about 1, 2, 3, the naughty step, if you do this, that will happen. You know, that real behaviour management stuff. And we were really bombarded with that as parents. And this book came out and everyone went, yeah, we sort of forgot that love's quite important as well. And what she talked about in this book, she says that the human baby is the most socially influenced creature on earth. It's not an accident that social media is so powerful in our world today. This is how we develop. We are socially influenced creatures. That they are open to learning what their emotions are and how to manage them. And it is as babies that we first feel and learn what to do with our feelings in a way that will affect our behaviour later. This is the biggest job that you have as a parent, is to teach this. If you want a fancy word for this, it's called emotional regulation. Okay, that's what it's called. But it's really at its heart, it's about teaching children what these weird things that they have. Because you know they don't actually know what they are until we teach it to them. So these things that they feel, our job is to teach them those, and then to teach them what to do when they have those feelings. You know, one of the biggest problems with this job that we have to teach our children is most of us aren't very good at it either. Most of us are actually not great at being able to label our own feelings. And even when we do label them, we're not great at managing them. So if I've got to teach this to my child, one of the first things I'm going to have to do is get better at managing my own emotions. And I don't know about you, but I actually found that really, really difficult. I found I could be a great mother when I was calm. But when I was angry, or when I was tired, or when I was frustrated, or when I was thirsty, or when I was sleepy, or any of those emotions, I really struggled to be the mother that I wanted to be. So I had to really go on a big journey to learn about managing my own emotions. I'll talk a bit about that later, but for me, that was when I started practicing mindfulness. I tried lots of other things, they never really worked. Mindfulness was the only thing that really helped me to regulate my feelings. So, we're going to talk about toddlers, and we're going to talk about children, and we're going to talk about adolescents. Has anybody in this room got a toddler? Okay. And a child, I would usually say is around between the ages of about 4 and 10. Anyone got one of those? Okay, quite a few. Anybody got an adolescent? So that would be 11 and above. Okay, so it's a good smattering. Now the reason that we separate these out is mainly to do with their brain development, their ability to do certain things, and emotional management is a big one. If you have an adolescent, do you sometimes feel like you have a toddler in your home? Yeah. And one of the reasons for that is that actually their brain is going through quite a similar journey to the one it did when they were a toddler. So when you're a toddler, a lot of change happens very quickly in your brain. That happens again during adolescence. So what I'll do is, in a minute, I'm going to start to talk a bit more about boundaries. And when I talk about that, I will have some differentiation between these age groups. That does not mean that they don't all need boundaries. But what it does mean is their ability to learn and understand those boundaries is hugely impacted on by how developed their brain is. Does that make sense to you? Yeah? So I will differentiate between them, but I wanted just to help you to understand what that meant. I think the one I just want to mention, for an adolescent, do you know what the age range is for an adolescent? Do you know when it starts and finishes? Around about, well, it's around about the onset of puberty. So that could be from age 10 for a girl. It's not exactly at the same time, but around about that same time. And it goes up to about 24, 25. Okay? I'm about to have the first adult in my home. Our eldest son is now 24. And I have to say, the last 3 years, I've seen a significant change in his brain. His ability to manage his emotions has been huge, actually. So even right at the end of adolescence, there's definitely a significant change. But it could be 15 years. You can have an adolescent for 15 years. Have I terrified you? The reason I say that is I think we spend so much time learning and understanding and preparing for the first year of our child's life. But it's only a year. What about the 15-year period when they're going to be an adolescent? A lot of parents, I find when their children get to that age, they're like, oh, do you know what, Joe, I've just given up. If I haven't taught it by now, then whatever. They're too old, it's too difficult, but it's an incredibly important time in your child's life. So even if you've got the most difficult adolescent in the world, please don't give up, it's not too late. Okay? So I'm a little bit far away. Okay, so, do you like my picture of a boundary in the desert? I thought that was quite good, yeah. I thought I won't be cruel and put up pictures of fields, because we'd just all be a bit depressed, wouldn't we? So, what are they? Why do we set them? How do we set them? These are really important questions. When we're thinking about a parenting skill, I think it's really important to understand what is it I'm actually trying to achieve when I do this thing? What do I want to happen? And once I think that, then how am I going to do that? And what am I looking for? How will I know if my child has learned this or not? So I mentioned there the skill of reflection. It's really important as a parent to reflect. I think one of the reasons we avoid reflecting is it makes us feel bad. Yeah? Because we tend to only reflect on the stuff we get wrong. And let's face it, who wants to do that? So when you reflect on the stuff you've got right, and on the stuff that you've got wrong, know that our brains learn through making mistakes. The human brain we have is actually built to develop through making mistakes. So making mistakes is part of the way that we grow. So don't be unkind to yourself for making a mistake. So let's think about this. What is a boundary? Well, I love this definition because I think it's really simple. And I've stolen this from Brené Brown. This is her definition of boundaries. What is okay and what isn't okay? When you set boundaries, which one of those do you normally focus on? What isn't okay, yeah? Thank you for being so honest, yes. We do tend to focus on the what isn't okay. But how would you feel if all day long somebody just kept telling you all the things you're not allowed to do? How would you feel about that? Would you like it? Would you go, yeah, come on, please, tell me some more things that I can't do today? I'd love that. You'd get really annoyed and irritated, wouldn't you? And also, you might start to get worried. If all you hear all day is all the things you're not allowed to do, you might start to get a bit anxious about that, actually. Oh, well, I better not do that, and I better not do that, and I better not do that. So eventually, my world could just get really small, because I'm so worried about all the things I'm not allowed to do, that all I can focus on is thinking about things I'm not allowed to do. And that is the difference between developing a yes brain and a no brain. And we really want our children to develop yes brains. So it's important when you're talking about boundaries to focus on what you can do. It's much nicer to hear it talked about in that way. It's much less likely to create anxiety in a child, particularly if they're prone to anxiety, and it helps develop a brain that says yes. Do you want children who tend to say yes, or children who tend to say no? Yes. Yes, I'd love to help you unpack the dishwasher, Mum. Yes, I can't wait to make my bed in the morning. How fantastic is that? Yes, I'd like to try out for the rugby team. Okay? And we know through neuroscience that, say, if we're constantly telling children what they can't do, their brain develops thinking about all the things they can't do. Do you get that? Does that make sense to you? Yeah. So we want to be focusing on the what is okay. And really, we're only going to talk about the what isn't okay when something happens that isn't okay. Do you get that? But if I'm talking to you preemptively about a boundary, just focus on what it is that you do want them to do. It's and it's actually nicer for you. I don't want to spend my whole day saying what not to do. Imagine if I came into this room and so, how long have we been here? Can't see. If I'd spent half an hour telling you about all the things you shouldn't do as a parent, how would you be feeling right now? Pretty fed up? Yeah. In fact, you'd have thought of an excuse to leave by now, wouldn't you? And I wouldn't blame you. It's just not what we want to hear. Boundaries are about self-worth. Interesting, that one. They're about self-love. When I set a boundary, what I'm saying is, I believe that I'm worthy of saying what is and what isn't okay for me. So I set a boundary from a place of believing that it's okay for me to do that. Does that make sense to you? So boundaries, parents often ask me, how do I help my child to be more confident? Well, one of the ways that children are more confident in situations is when they have good self-worth. And teaching a child about boundaries so that as they grow older they can set boundaries for themselves is a practical way of me actually saying I am worthy of saying that what you've just done isn't okay. And I am worthy of saying that if you want to be my friend, this is how you need to behave. Does that make sense to you? You know, children really struggle to set boundaries with friends, don't they? They really struggle to say to their friends, you know, if you're going to be my friend, I want you to be kind to me. If you're going to be my friend, it's not okay if you abandon me at lunchtime. But you see, children struggle with boundaries because of the way they're taught them. They're not taught that boundaries are about love or self-worth. They're taught that boundaries are about something very different. And I'll talk about that. They're about self-respect. When I set a boundary for you, I'm demonstrating that I respect myself and I respect you. I respect myself enough to say what is and isn't okay, and I respect you enough to explain to you how I want things to work. There's nothing worse than being in an environment where you're not sure what to do, is there? Have you ever gone into a new environment and have no idea what is expected of you in that environment? Yeah? It's really uncomfortable. So when I am able to do that, that's about, when people set boundaries for me, it's about showing me respect and helping me to understand how to manage in this environment. They take a lot of courage. It takes courage to set boundaries. Parents who set boundaries consistently are very courageous, because what tends to happen when we set boundaries with children? They push back, don't they? They go, no, I'm not doing that. I mean, if they're an adolescent, they probably say a lot worse than that, but they'll say no, or they'll ignore you, or they'll go and do completely the opposite. And often when that happens, we go, oh, you know what, this is just really hard work. I want to be sitting on that beach that Joe showed me in that picture. I'm not doing this anymore. So we give up because it just feels hard. So it takes courage to set boundaries, and persistence, I would say. It requires vulnerability. Now, this is an interesting word, vulnerability, because most people think of vulnerability as weakness. Is that true? Would that be your feeling about that word, that it's describing weakness? Okay, well, luckily, a lot of research has been done about vulnerability, and it is nothing to do with weakness. Vulnerability is actually the ability to say or do something without knowing the outcome. Me coming in here tonight requires quite a bit of vulnerability, doesn't it? Because I've got no idea what you're thinking in your head. I've no idea who the parents are that I'm going to meet. And you coming in here requires a bit of vulnerability, especially if you had no clue what I was going to be talking about. I could have been hypnotising you all and making you run around. So, you know, it takes courage, and being vulnerable means taking risks. It's setting a boundary, having no idea what's going to happen when I do this. I don't know how my child is going to respond. I'm not actually even entirely sure it's the right boundary, but I know I need to do it because some strange woman at DBS told me I had to, so I better just have a go. Yeah? So it requires us to be vulnerable and to take risks. It requires compassion and empathy to set boundaries, if you want to do it in a way that's going to really teach what you want it to teach. And these two are quite hard, these two skills. It's not easy to have compassion and empathy at 8:30 at night when you've put your child to bed 5 times already. It's not easy to have compassion and empathy when you've asked your child to get off the PlayStation 25 million times and they're still ignoring you. Okay, these skills are not easy at all. But did anyone ever tell you parenting would be easy? Did anyone ever say, yeah, go on, have 15 children, you're going to love it. It's like the easiest job you're ever going to do. The pay is awesome, you get loads of leave, good medical care. You know, parenting is hard, isn't it? It requires perseverance. So compassion and empathy are really important skills when it comes to setting boundaries, but they are difficult. It requires me to decide that the thing I want to teach my child is cooperation rather than control. It's much easier to use strategies that are about control than it is to use strategies about cooperation. Because most of us are really clear about controlling strategies, aren't we? We know, I mean, I'm not saying they actually work, but we'll have a really good go at doing them, and we will be really persistent. We'll just become more controlling if it doesn't work. Yeah, is that true? Why do you think we're all really good at using controlling strategies? Because our parents taught us how to control, because they tried to control us. Isn't that true? Yeah? So we're really good at these skills because our parents taught them to us. Think about that for a minute. Boundaries are about safety. They're about keeping your child safe by setting boundaries for them until they are old enough to keep themselves safe by setting their own boundaries. So they should never be about fear. There should never be any fear around boundaries because they are actually about keeping me safe. If I'm fearful of boundaries, am I going to put them in place myself when I'm a teenager? What do you think? How good are teenagers at doing something to a friend that they think is going to damage that friendship? Do you think they'll do it? Do you think they'll put in place a boundary with another friend if there's fear involved? They won't. So however we teach boundaries, it has to feel safe. They have to feel that this is about my safety. And there's a push and pull in them. You know, it's not like you're going to do it once and they go, yeah, okay, I get that. That really makes sense. Thank you so much for teaching me that. Has anyone's child ever said that? I'd love to know. I want to adopt that child if they did. Yeah? So what I'm saying to you is when you put boundaries in place, don't have an expectation that your children will go, thanks very much. That really tells me that you love and respect me. I really appreciate it. It's not going to happen like that. That's not the way that children develop. Okay? So if you think about it, for a toddler, their boundaries for them is just somebody feeling like someone else is trying to take control. And all toddlers want to do is take control of their world. They are completely egocentric, everything is about them, and they will just keep going until they get their own way. So if you ever try to get into a head-to-head with a toddler, you're never going to win. And if you do win, the cost of that will be significant to your relationship. So toddlers will absolutely push because everything in their brain, everything nature, all the messages nature sends them is try it, touch it, feel it, put it in your mouth. Just because someone tells you not to, don't. And if they tell you to put it in your mouth, don't do that. Especially if it's green. Definitely don't put green things in your mouth. So toddlers are programmed to push boundaries. Children are still programmed, but not quite as much as toddlers. Because when they start to become a little bit more sociocentric, they'll start to maybe slightly, possibly consider somebody else's perspective, if they've been taught that. So they may be a little bit more cooperative with boundaries, depending on how they're put in place. And then, of course, we get to the creature that is an adolescent. And I have to tell you, I love adolescents. They are my favourite age group. But boy, they will push every boundary going. You know, they have this message in their head that says, go on, try it. Go on, try it. And if your friends are doing it, definitely try it. They're programmed to take risks. They're programmed to explore creatively. Every single part of their brain is telling them to test and to see what happens when you do it. So if you try to put boundaries in place with an adolescent and expect them to go, no, I totally get why I can't go to that party on Saturday night. It seems perfectly sensible that I have to get up to school in the morning. It's just not going to happen. So I think it's really important to manage your expectations around boundaries. Just because your child pushes back, it doesn't mean you're doing the wrong thing. Do you understand that? So if you look at that list that I've put up there about how we, how do we set boundaries? What are they around? What do they teach? What do you think, what is that list? If I was to ask you the skills that you wanted your child to develop before they became an adult, would any of those skills be on that list? Would they all be on that list? Would you want them to have all of those things? Would you want them to know what is and isn't okay? Would you want them to have self-worth and self-respect and courage and vulnerability and compassion and empathy, to know how to cooperate, to know how to keep themselves safe, and to know how to sometimes push against boundaries? Do you want them to have all of those skills? Yeah? I do. I absolutely do. Which means I have to do what, as a parent? If I want my child to have all of those skills, what have I got to do? I have to model it. I have to. There's no getting away from this. I know that we so wish there was another way to teach these things to our children, that somehow we could pay somebody else and they would teach it to them. But the thing is that the connection that you have with your child is so powerful that you are absolutely the best teacher. We can also be the worst teachers as well, can't we? We're really good at teaching them all the things we don't want them to do. But we have to at least have a stab most of the time at teaching them the things that we do want them to do. So the way that you set boundaries, if you do it using these skills, you are role modeling all of these things to your children, which means you're teaching them all, which means that when they get to an age where they have to put boundaries in place for themselves to keep themselves safe, they will feel okay doing it. They're not going to be scared of it. If you think about this, are these the skills that you currently use to put boundaries in place with your children? Are there any others that you? Who's going to be brave? I'm looking for a brave soul. I mean, I can be brave, that's okay, because you're such a lovely audience, I don't mind. But are there any skills that you currently use to teach boundaries? Determination. Is that your determination or theirs? So you keep going. Yeah? Yeah? Determination? Yeah. Determination, perseverance, yeah? Do you keep going even when you know that you should stop? Even when you know that actually maybe what I'm saying isn't really what I wanted to say, or that I've gone a bit too far. Do you find that you do that as well? So when you know you're wrong, do you stop? Or do you just keep going? You know, because the problem is, once we're on a roll, it's hard to stop, isn't it? We just keep going. And we don't, how many people in this room go, just stop and go, you know what? When I told you that I'm going to ground you for 3 months, like, that was a really stupid thing to say. And I'm really sorry. And I need to find a better way to set that boundary. Have you ever done that? Good, well done. Because when you do that, do you know what you've just role modelled? How to make a mistake, how to take responsibility for making a mistake, and how to make amends. That's what you role model when you make a mistake. What else do you tend to do when you set boundaries? You said something.
Oh, I just count to 3.
I just count to 3. Well, what happens when you get to 3? Okay, so you use, you threaten.
Yeah, well, they've learned to do stuff before then.
Because of fear.
Well, yes.
Yeah. So we often use fear when we're setting boundaries, don't we? Why do we use fear? Why do we try to use fear to get our children to comply? It seems like easier in the moment, yeah? Why else do we use fear?
It works more often.
It seems to work in the moment, yeah? Possibly because that's how boundaries are set with us. How are you feeling when you use fear with your child? You feel in control, but how did you feel before you used? Before you threatened to get them to do something, how did you feel? Frustrated, angry, scared? Scared that they weren't going to do the thing that you wanted? Out of control? You see, we have a tendency as parents, when we feel out of control, instead of managing that feeling of being out of control, we will do anything to get the control back. So we will use fear. Well, the thing is, I don't actually want teach my child how to control other people. Because who will they start to try to control first? Me. Okay. I don't really want to give them the skills of threatening and controlling, because who are they going to use them on first? Maybe their friends. Maybe their siblings. You know, children tend to test out skills on their siblings. Have you ever seen your children using threatening and controlling behaviour on their sibling? Okay, well now you know where it comes from. They'll use it on their siblings, they'll use it on you, they'll use it on their friends at school, because they've learnt it from you. And the other problem is, if there's fear associated with setting boundaries, if to me, boundaries feel something that is a bit scary and a bit uncomfortable, and if I set a boundary and somebody doesn't follow through, I now have to threaten them. If that's what I grow up believing, how keen am I going to be to set boundaries with my friends? I'm not going to do it, am I? Particularly not as an adolescent, because what do adolescents want more than anything else? Acceptance. They want to belong. They want to fit in. So there's no way that they are going to do something that risks that. So one of the things you'll see that adolescents really struggle with is setting boundaries with each other. And if they can't set boundaries with each other, if they don't feel able to do that, what happens to an adolescent who cannot set boundaries for themselves? Oh, distraction, thank you for mentioning that. That's a really interesting one. Do you ever use distraction as a way of getting kids to do stuff? Yeah? Do you ever use distraction on yourself as a way of avoiding difficult feelings? Yeah. I wonder where you learned that. I wonder where we all learn to distract ourselves from difficult feelings. And what are the things that we tend to use to distract ourselves from a feeling of, I don't know, anxiety, feeling a bit left out, feeling a bit lonely, feeling a bit hungry, just feeling generally? What types of things, behaviours do adults do when they want to distract themselves? By the way, we do this totally unconsciously most of the time. What do? Eat, drink wine, or tea or whatever, yeah. Eat chocolate, watch mindless TV, social media. One of the most common things that people do when they want to distract themselves from how they're feeling is going on social media. And then what happens when you go on the social media? You just feel worse, because you just see all these people have got these perfect lives. Okay? And of course this is what children and adolescents are doing, aren't they? They're distracting themselves from anything that makes them feel slightly uncomfortable. And one of the biggest distractions they've got, which I'm so grateful I did not have as a child, is social media. And then of course they feel worse. So you see, that's the problem with the strategy of distraction. In a very young toddler, I think distraction can be a useful tool. However, as they get older, it can cause significant issues. Do you understand that?
That's why I said we require lots of creativity.
Yeah, to be creative. But the problem is that I've got parents of children that are 11 that's still trying to distract them, and it really doesn't work. So it's really important. Boundaries are incredibly important. They teach some amazing things, but we have to be so mindful about the way that we put boundaries into place. Because one of the most important skills that you can send your child into adolescence and into the world with is the ability to put boundaries in place for themselves. Because when they do that, they're reinforcing their sense of self-worth. Now, a sense of self-worth is one of the most protective factors that an adolescent can have. The research tells us that adolescents with a good sense of self-worth are far less likely to engage in high-risk behaviours during adolescence. This does not mean they're going to be angels and never do anything wrong, but they're not likely to engage in behaviours that could lead to criminal activities, highly antisocial, high self-risk. So self-worth is really important, and the way you put boundaries in place really impacts on self-worth. So you want to send your children into their adulthood with the ability and the feeling like it's safe for me to put boundaries in place. I don't have to damage a relationship in order to put boundaries in place. In fact, boundaries are a really good foundation of strong relationships. Do you have friends that you struggle to put boundaries in place with? Yeah? Does anybody in this room just say yes and then afterwards really wish they'd said no? Okay? You see, a lot of us struggle with boundaries. I thought, until I was about 40, I thought I was the only person in the world that struggled with boundaries. And then of course I started teaching them and realised that pretty much everybody struggles with them. And so I was really determined that I was going to teach my children boundaries better. And that's why I don't use threatening behaviour. And I don't bribe or do any of those types of things, because I want them to feel good about putting boundaries in place for themselves. So I have to raise them in a way that boundaries feel safe and good for them. Does that make sense to you? It's not an easy one to wrap your head around. This is a beautiful quote, and one that I return to many, many times when I get it wrong, which I do, and we all do. I will not teach or love or show you anything perfectly, but I will let you see me, and I will always hold sacred the gift of seeing you. Which means I will let you see me, warts and all. I'm not going to pretend that I'm perfect. I'm not going to pretend that I know it all. I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to get it right all the time. And I'll let you see all of that. And I will also see that in you. and I will honour that. I won't love you in spite of your imperfections. I will love you because of your imperfections. And it's really important as a parent that you remember you don't need to be perfect. Okay? It's not possible. So if you're aiming for it, you're just always going to feel like a bit rubbish, to be honest. You don't need to be perfect, and nor do your children. And the imperfections are often where you'll find the most joy, actually. If I was to think of all the times with my children when we've had the moments of the greatest connection, when we've laughed and cried, they haven't been those holidays on the beach in Bali. They've been the times when one of us has really, really messed up. Yeah? When they've made a mistake, or I have. So imperfection is a really important thing to remember. But by the way, that is a beautiful piece of writing. If you Google the Wholehearted Parenting Manifesto, it's a really beautiful piece of writing. So, at the very beginning here, we were talking about waves. The parenting often feels like you're on a very rough sea, or standing on a beach and the sea just keeps coming, and the waves just keep coming. It just doesn't stop. And sometimes the waves feel really, really big. And what I was saying at the beginning when we were talking about this is that one of the key things that I found in my parenting is that I got to a point where I was pretty clear about what skills were that I wanted to use. I had a pretty clear idea of what I wanted to teach and how I was going to teach it. The problem was in the delivery. Like, I logically knew it all, but in that moment, when I was in that, down in the dirt with my child, guess what? I couldn't do it. I just wasn't able to, because I didn't know how to manage my feelings. So I brought my fear, my frustration, my helplessness, my anxiety, my disappointment, all of that, because I'm human, so I have all those feelings. I couldn't manage them in order to be calm enough to put these lovely, amazing strategies that I knew worked into place. Have you ever thought, like, I know what to do, but I just can't do it? Does that happen to you? Yeah, and it's really annoying, isn't it? And you get frustrated, and then often after a time you just give up, because it just feels too difficult to keep going. That was the place I found myself, and I was like, there's got to be something I can do to help me stay calm enough to actually teach the stuff that I know is really important to teach. And I looked at many different ways. I mean, I'm trained in cognitive behavioural therapy, I'm a hypnotherapist, I trained in all these things, by the way, because I thought they would help me. None of them worked. And then I came across, in fact it's really weird, because I was sitting in my office in this school upstairs. It's about 10 years ago now, 11 years ago, 12 years ago. I came across this tiny little article in this psychology magazine that mentioned mindfulness. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting, I wonder what that is. And it was a report on the mindfulness-based stress reduction program that John Kabat-Zinn, whose quote I showed you at the beginning, it was some of the early research coming out of his program, and it talked about that you could learn these skills that would help you to manage your stress and your anxiety so that you could stay calmer. And I was like, right, that's the one for me. I'm going to try that. And this was in the days they didn't have workshops. There were no workshops except in Massachusetts, in America, to learn this. So I taught myself, and I started practicing it. And I kept practicing it. It was quite hard at the beginning. You have to practice every day for about 20 minutes a day. And then I started to notice I just felt calmer. Like, not just with my kids, but all the time. I felt calmer. And I didn't get so angry. And I didn't feel so frustrated. And then if I didn't practice it for a couple of days, for 3 or 4 days, I noticed that I started to feel more stressed again. Because I like to experiment with things like that. Even when I know something's good for me, I like to stop doing it for a while just to check it's actually that's working. And I've been practicing it for about 10 years, 10 to 12 years now. And for me, it was the key that unlocked everything else. It was the thing that made the biggest difference for me. Not just in my parenting, but in all areas of my life. I became a person who actually could be calm, which I never honestly thought was possible. I didn't grow up in a calm house, didn't really know what calm was. But I did learn how to be calm, and it meant that I could then do all the things that I wanted to do. And amazingly enough, of course, what happened was, when I learned to be calm, what was I then able to teach to my children? How to be calm. Not by threatening them, not by putting them in timeout, not by sending them to their room, not by doing all of those things that we do, but actually by teaching them how to be calm. Yep, there's loads of practical exercises. So, I like to call them strategies for surfing when it comes to parenting. Breathing. We do it every day. Most of us are doing it incorrectly. I was doing it incorrectly, didn't realise. Breathing. Learning how to breathe properly makes a massive difference. Being non-judgmental. Of who? Me, first. Yeah? Being non-judgmental of myself first. I used to say, I don't need anyone else criticising me. I can do that perfectly well myself, thank you very much. I am the expert in self-criticism, and I was. The first time I read the word self-compassion, I was like, what does that mean? Surely that's some weird thing that only, I don't know, Buddhists do or something? I don't even know what that means. Okay, so being non-judgmental of ourselves first and then being able to be non-judgmental of others, that's a huge gift, I can tell you. Being able to be present. Not, that thing we talked about at the beginning where we go time travelling? So I'm in the moment dealing with my 5-year-old, but actually I'm talking to them like they're 13, or 14, or 15, or whatever. So I'm now feeling anxious because I'm worried about what may happen in the future. Or I'm dealing with my 5-year-old and all I can think about is the stories that my parents told me of how awful my brother was when he was 5, and look where he is now. There's no way my child's going to end up like that, so I better sort it out now. Okay? And that's the time travelling that we do into the past, and that creates a lot of fear. So when you're living in the past, you're full of fear. When you're living in the future, you're full of anxiety. And what I noticed is that I was just spending a lot of time in the past and the future, and not a lot of time in the present. So when we're in the present, it's amazing because we can do all sorts of things that actually have an impact now. And the thing is, children are naturally mindful. They're in the present. If you ever want to see the best mindfulness guru ever, just find a baby. Okay? Babies are completely mindful. They're just in the present. Being curious. John Kabat-Zinn calls this the beginner's mind. Like looking at something as if I'm dealing with it for the first time. When you're parenting your child and you're like, this is like the 75th time we've had this conversation, and we bring the frustration and anger from all of those previous conversations into this parenting moment, don't we? Yeah? But what if you didn't do that? What if you could just deal with it as if it was the first time? What if you could just be curious about what was going on for your child now, in this moment, today? How different would that be? How different would that be for you? Would it be better? Yeah, I tell you it's a lot better. And how different would it be for them? They'd actually have the opportunity to do something different, wouldn't they? Without all the weight of the judgment of the past sitting on their shoulders. Having an awareness of our emotions, really noticing what it is that you're feeling, and be curious and not judgmental of it. And lastly, breathing. I asked my husband to check these slides and he went, "Joe, you've written breathing twice." I went, "I know." Actually, the whole slide could just say breathing. It's incredibly important to breathe. Shall I tell you why? Do you know the scientific reasons why it's so important to breathe?
Lose weight.
We lose weight. Well, you can, if you eat mindfully, you definitely would. But we never talk about losing weight because the brain doesn't want to lose anything. Don't ever say, "I'm going to lose weight." You could say, I want to let go of or release, but never lose. Okay? That's the hypnotherapist in me talking. The thing is, when our breathing changes, when we breathe very quickly, it sends a message to a part of our brain called our amygdala that we're in danger. And then when our amygdala wakes up, we go into our fight, flight, or freeze mode, which is never a good place to parent from unless your child actually is in danger. So when we breathe and we slow our breathing down, we actually tell the amygdala that we're okay, and it calms down. We have a nerve at the back of our throat that senses when our breath changes, and it sends messages to our brain that our breathing has changed. So breathing is an incredibly powerful thing. I had a yoga teacher once who said to me, "The thing that you need to understand, Joe, is that breath is the only language that your body understands. Your body doesn't understand talking, it doesn't understand words, but it understands breath. So if you want to change your body's response to something, you need to change your breath." And practicing, of course. So Danny Penman, who is the guy, he's a doctor, he came into mindfulness because he had a really bad skydiving accident. And he actually ended up developing a program to use mindfulness to manage pain. So he's really the beginner of mindfulness-based cognitive behavioural therapy. So that's what he teaches. And he says that when you've mastered the art of breathing, you will finally be at peace with yourself and the world. A bit of peace would be nice. We're back on that beach again, aren't we, on the sun loungers, yeah? So, I will answer some questions if you have any in a minute. I said to you at the very beginning that the work that I do is primarily around supporting and teaching parents. And everything I teach always has a mindfulness perspective. I teach through workshops, and I teach individually, and I also teach mindfulness. So the mindful parenting workshops are really skills-based workshops. So skills that we use from a mindfulness perspective. The mindfulness workshop is actually teaching you the skills to practice mindfulness. Does that make sense? There's no right or wrong. Some people will only do one, some people will do both, some people will do them in an order. It's no requirement. It's really, what do you feel that you need? What is the thing that you're struggling with? Where do you feel that the support would be most useful to you? So I said to you at the beginning, because the brain development is quite significantly different in these age ranges, that the mindful parenting workshops are split into age groups. And what I say to parents, if you want to come to a workshop and you have children that fit into multiple age ranges, I generally recommend come to the one for your eldest child. Because most of the others, they will filter down, and it's a good place to start. So, that's the end. I'm sure I've probably gone over because I always do, and I'm not too bad. Okay. It's okay because I'm now good at embracing my imperfections. If anybody wants to leave, I'm not even remotely offended. You go. You go, that's absolutely fine. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask? Shall I use the other microphone? Because I think I might struggle to hear.
I just want to know, hi, my name is Sama.
Hi.
I have 3 boys as well.
Oh, a blessing.
Different age groups as well. I just want to know, are the strategies we're using reversible? Is it too late to change, or how does it work?
Well, luckily we have.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have. We have something in our brain called neuroplasticity, which means that our brains can change. They can unlearn. They can learn new things. In fact, our brains continue to make connections until the moment of death. So you can always learn something new. I think as you get older, it can feel harder because often you have to unlearn something in order to learn something new. But of course it's possible to learn. If I didn't believe it was possible, I wouldn't bother, to be honest. It can feel hard, and I think especially trying to do it on your own can feel really hard. And that's why I try to teach other parents, because I found doing it on my own was difficult. Of course I did have my lovely husband to help me, he's sitting down there. All my other colleagues are teaching meditation tonight, so he came with me. Thank you. Any other questions? Anyone wants to ask? I feel like I'm on a talk show coming up here with the microphone. There we go.
To ask you a question, you work for, workshops or for kids who suffer anxiety? I've got a friend who, her child, is one of the best schooling devices. She really struggles, she has anxiety.
You're asking about workshops for children?
Who suffer anxiety.
Yeah, the answer is I don't run workshops for children.
For the parents, they could help.
For parents of children with anxiety, yes, but not for children. Because the thing is, if I'm a child with anxiety and you send me on a workshop to learn how to deal with my anxiety...
But at least for the parents?
Yeah, for parents, yes. Anxiety has many different causes, but it's probably the thing that I deal with the most. I'll be honest, it's a huge issue, because I think the world is becoming more stressed, isn't it? So the more stressed and anxious adults become, guess what happens? We have more stressed, anxious children. Do you see that? Yeah. The key thing is, if you're a parent of a child with anxiety, it's highly likely that one of the parents also has anxiety, which means you're going to have to learn how to manage your own anxiety so that you can support your child. Does that make sense to you?
And it's not for me, it's for a friend.
Yeah, I have to say I've never yet met a child with anxiety where one of their parents didn't also have anxiety. It's never happened in 20 years. Good question though, thank you. Anybody else got a question? I will give you this.
It's again something to do with anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we were kids once upon a time and we were anxious, but we got through it. We learned to deal with it. Why is it so difficult for kids these days to deal with basic school anxiety, like anything? Why is it?
Well, one of the first questions I'd say is, did we actually learn to deal with anxiety, or did we just develop coping strategies that hid the anxiety? Because that's an interesting one. Because I do come across a lot of parents who tell me they're not anxious, and when I ask them about the strategies they use to manage their lives, they are 100% using all these strategies to avoid feeling anxious. Do you understand? So one of those could be a parent who is very keen that everything is done exactly the right way. Because if everything is done in the way that it's meant to be done, I don't feel anxious.
OCD.
It's not OCD necessarily, it can develop, but even just a parent who is very, has to follow a certain schedule, if the kids are 1 minute late leaving the house in the morning, if anything changes in their environment or at school, they will do anything they can to avoid feeling anxious, which means they will tend to exhibit quite controlling behaviours. Do you understand that? So first of all, I'd say is, do we actually learn to cope with it, or do we just learn how to avoid the feeling? Because it's not the same thing at all. Secondly, we are not raising our children in the same world that we were raised in. There is definitely a much higher rate of stress and anxiety for a whole host of reasons. And so we're raising our children in a more stressful, anxious world. And I think we don't really understand it or how to deal with it. I'm always amazed at how many people actually don't even understand what anxiety is. Yeah, it's a good question, thank you. Any other questions? Can you just pass that back? Thank you very much.
Yeah, talking boundaries and adolescent, and talking social media and the need to have to belong to a group. Would you say one of the good strategies is negotiating with them, or how can we as parents best approach this for them to not be too frustrated at the same time?
How long have we got? I mean, it's a huge topic, isn't it? I would say that the negotiation has to come before the boundary is set, not afterwards. Okay, so if you're going to negotiate, I would rather probably use the word problem solve, brainstorm, rather than negotiation, because it feels like there's a power play going on. But if we're going to problem solve and come up with an idea that works, that has to be done before the boundary is set. If you negotiate after the boundary has been set, you're actually teaching them to negotiate boundaries. Do you understand that? So I'm all for involving adolescents in talking about it and really listening to their perspective. It still may mean setting a boundary that they're not entirely happy with. And I think the other thing that's important to say to them is, this is the boundary for now. It doesn't mean this is going to be the boundary forever. Do you understand that? This is what I feel comfortable with now. And we can review it. We can review it in a month. We can review it in 2 months. We can review it every month. And as you get older and as I see you can cope better with what's happening, perhaps we can change the boundary. But this is what I'm comfortable for now. Because the thing with adolescents is they have a really bizarre concept of time. So unless you make it very clear what the time limit is, as far as they're concerned, that's forever. Like, you know, it's just forever. They can't even imagine that it would change. So talk about how long this boundary will be for and that we can review it. It doesn't mean I'm going to change it, but I'm happy to keep it as an open discussion. And understand that even if they agree to it, it doesn't mean they won't be disappointed. And we have to allow them to have that feeling of disappointment. They're allowed to be disappointed when they don't get what they want. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, somehow we think like that we've agreed to it and now you should be happy. Any more questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So most of us grew up in our own countries, right?
Yeah.
So we got used to what was going on in our places, like little by little.
Yeah.
Whereas our children, I don't know the others, but my children have been here for 12 years.
Yeah.
And in 2 years they'll be back home, and they haven't been exposed to many things,
Yeah.
right? So how do you see this? How can we help them? Because I don't know. Every time I go home, they explore new things and they do crazy things, and it's like they shock it, and then they have to come back and they have behaviors that are.
Well, I think, it would depend on the age of the children when you move them.
Oh, well, we moved here, they were toddlers.
How old will they be when you move back?
2 and 4, and they will be 18. Well, they go back for university.
I'll go back for
right?
university.
And we'll stay here.
Okay.
So,
okay.
and then, well, they know what's okay, not okay, right?
Well, you have to talk about it, don't you? You have to talk about it, and you have to understand that they're going to struggle with that. My children have all left here to go back to the UK. My youngest, who's just gone, came here. He came here to this school in year 1, and left this school in year 13, and then went to university. I have to say, he's the most well-adjusted child I've ever met. I've been quite amazed. He seems okay with it. I think he did go back to the UK more regularly in the last few years to help him adjust to that. But a lot of that is about talking about it, about what the differences are, what the similarities are. And actually, to be honest, what he said to me is, really, Mum, the only thing that's really different is the weather. Like, people are the same all over the world. You know, people have the same issues no matter where they live. It's not really that different. So I think it's also ensuring that you prepare them for that. You know, that we don't over-parent them while they're here. Because if you're in a situation where you're still dropping off and picking up your children from school one day, and the next day they're living in another country on their own. That's quite a big transition, isn't it? So it's about preparing them for that before they go. Teaching them to cook, teaching them to do finances, teaching them how to go shopping for themselves, teaching them about public transport, taking them back to your home country on holiday and doing all those things with them there. Just helping to prepare them. Does that make sense, yeah? Do you want me to finish? I'm conscious of keeping everybody here. Last question then, yeah.
How do you get children to listen the first time? I think that's one of the biggest challenges without becoming the nagging parent.
How do you get children to listen the first time?
When you say, okay, do your bed, or, you know.
I've no idea how you get children to listen the first time. I'll be honest with you. If I knew the answer to that question, I'd be on an island in the Bahamas. I wouldn't be standing here. I mean, it's an unrealistic expectation that a child would listen. How do you listen the first time every time?
Apparently.
You know, listening is a skill that we practice and that we get better at over time, and particularly when we start to understand what it feels like not to be listened to. So when I'm able to understand what it feels like for me not to be listened to, I can start to empathise with what it might feel like for somebody else not to be listened to. And therefore, I will probably try to listen to others as much as I can, but I'm also going to fail. Because a lot of the time we're so in our own heads, we're totally unaware of what is going on around us. And there's a difference, you know, what type of listening are you talking about? Listening so that I get to do something that somebody else keeps telling me to do all the time. It's really not that interesting. So I would say listening tends to improve when children are able to develop empathy and understand what it feels like not to be listened to. And we have to do a lot of role modelling of listening to them. We have to show them what listening looks like and help them to feel what it's like to be listened to. I generally think as parents we're not great at listening to our children, actually. Or we'll only listen to them when they're talking to us politely in a certain way, which happens quite rarely. So I would say, if you have a child that's struggling with listening, really focus on your listening skills and really practice it, and even say to them, okay, I'm listening. I can see this is really important to you. I really want to hear what you have to say. So actually verbalise that you're listening. Does that make sense? So that they know what that looks like. And remember, there's a difference between listening to understand and listening to respond. Because when we listen to understand, we're not thinking about what we're going to say next. We're just listening to really understand what's happening for this person. When we're listening to respond, we're just waiting for them to stop speaking so we can say something. Is that true? You all know the difference, don't you? So I would also think, when I listen to my child, which one am I doing? Have I already decided what I'm going to say before they've even finished speaking? Because if I am doing that a lot, am I really listening? It's a great question, though. I love questions about listening. Thank you. I will hang around, but I'll let everyone go because I feel bad about keeping everybody here any longer. So I'm going to let everyone go, and I'll